Sam here, along with Annabel and Grainne from the Eden Project, and today is episode 2 of our Building Community series called Hopes, Hearts and Headaches. And in this episode, we have called this one Bridging Divides in Tricky Times. And the context behind this conversation is that people have been telling us more and more that they're feeling a little bit of fear and uncertainty around bringing people together, with so much division that they feel is in our national sort of radar just at the moment, and exactly how they can do that well. I think there are fears around bringing people together who are different or who hold different views maybe from one another. And there's a bit of a sense of worry around the conflict that might occur when you're out and about doing your good stuff, making good stuff happen. And also then looking at it from a different perspective, we heard somebody say just the other day that it's difficult for them to bring people with difference together because there's actually not that much diversity around where they live. And we thought about that a little bit and thought about actually diversity. We think about it in its widest possible sense. So you can have a diversity in views, perspectives, age, gender, ethnicity, interests, hobbies. So we want this conversation to think about it in its widest possible sense. And at this point, I'm going to bring Grainne in for your thoughts and perspectives on this.
Well, obviously, coming from Northern Ireland, I'm quite familiar with the impact of living in a divided community and the kind of impacts of polarisation. And I was thinking just on that same topic yesterday about the More in Common network and their really powerful analogy around we've more in common than that which divides us. And I always think about that and think that's so true. There's great power in recognising and celebrating difference as well, though. And I think that if you don't get to know each other, how can you empathise or understand others? And it's that message of like they or them, they are taking away from me, that drives polarization in communities. And actually, when you sit down together and get to recognize the power of the difference and the genuine fun in the learning, then I think it changes your perspective a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a kind of them and us, isn't there? When you sit down, it becomes we and us together, doesn't it? Annabel, do you want to just share your thoughts, just to lay some sort of foundations around the topic as well?
Yeah, just to build on that, you always feel sort of slightly isolated, don't you? It's just me experiencing this, but actually there's a lot of us all in this together. And there's something to note here, which is almost the elephant in the room, of how terrifying it is to read the news today. And I'm sure every generation has said that about the time in which they were also living. The world can seem like a very terrifying place, because it is. But as well as that, there's also a lot of good news going on and good things that happen every day. But it's those worries that sort of go through your head when you are taking your first steps on your community journey, when you're going out to invite that person to a big lunch for the first time, for example. You're thinking, oh no, this is danger. It's literally the sort of saying of stranger danger, isn't it? But actually we do have more in common than we have as difference.
That's right. And then how we celebrate that difference and actually learn that there's a rich diversity of people out there, and what we are missing out on it if we don't do this thing. I think a lot of people think, oh, what's the consequences if I do this? But actually, what are the consequences if you don't? And then you miss out on a whole lot of good stuff and good rich knowledge and diversity that we can create together. So on that note, we would love to share some good examples, I think, and what helps bring those people together and how we do that. So Grainne, I know that you've got some examples from Northern Ireland and beyond, haven't you, that you've seen happen firsthand?
Yeah, hopefully you've got a few photographs, because it would be nicer to share some of those than just my mug, and help kind of illustrate some of what I'm saying. So, looking at kind of the ways in which we can, I suppose, share some of the joy of our difference as well. I was looking and thinking, working with the Big Lunch for so many years, I truly think the Big Lunch brings everyone together, and it's a great way to make connections. I think food's a fantastic convener of people, and when we sit down to eat together, we take time to listen to each other and really make some good connections, and possibly even some really lovely friendships. But I think also music breaks down barriers. There's a lovely example here in this photograph from the Belfast Holy Lands, which is an area behind the Queen's University. And this was an organised event by a number of local groups coming together, connecting with each other and also with the local neighbours, and organising an Irish ceilidh, along with some of the, like groups from different places in the world. And so there was an Irish ceilidh and some Middle Eastern food, and really just a lovely example of music, creativity, and food help people understand the joy of difference as well, and finding some similarities in what they have in common as well.
Absolutely, and in those images, Grainne, I couldn't help but notice how much colour there was in that bunting, and I know that you've got some lovely examples too, haven't you, around that art and creativity, about bringing people together through that as well.
Yeah, well, I think, the world needs more colour, doesn't it? Says her sitting here in her dark colours. But I think that, again, in Northern Ireland, we're very familiar with our flag culture, and some people love a flag and others are very much against them for lots of reasons. And both sides, culturally have their own flags and things like that. But I think creatively wise, actually, with the Big Lunch, when we've looked at how people have used bunting and flags and reused and repurposed things and got really creative. Some of those nice visuals that you showed there was a lovely one there, actually, Annabel, you were involved in, where we asked people to paint what they loved about nature, and what joy they found in their communities. And that we got them back and we hung them up as bunting, and those are beautiful things that are talking points. But depending on how you grew up and culturally who you are, your perspective on things is different. And that came across really in terms of nature, because some people were drawing things from a street point of view that we would never consider. And then also people were just using rags and turning them into riches, making them beautiful bunting out of old socks and, pieces of material they didn't want anymore. So I suppose what I'm saying is that there are lots of things you could talk about on this topic that we'll not cover in 10 minutes, but just starting to explore different ways and different people's culture through art and creativity and music and food is so powerful.
It reminds me of an event that I did a couple of years ago, which was called Snap Happy. And Grainne, when you talk about how you begin to see things that you wouldn't have thought of before because somebody else's perspective has come in. This was a photography event that we did, and it was a timed, sort of fast-paced event, and we just gave people one word and they had to run off and choose a photo that take a picture that they thought represented that one word. And you can see here the ways that came out. So like the top middle one there is a little boy taking a picture of his nan, and the theme there was close up. The one next to it, that little boy with the composters there, that one was odd one out, and the bottom left was an entry around colours. And then we held an exhibition afterwards where everybody's photographs and the theme was shown, and people would come together to talk about how they didn't see the same perspective, from one word from one another. And it also gave that sense of place. You might have seen in that picture there was one on hope, and some people had shared images of churches and faith, whereas others had seen a little crack of a little plant growing up through the pavement and viewed that as hope. But what was more beautiful about it was people coming together afterwards to look at the ways other people had seen things. That was really quite something. Annabel, one of the things, at the moment, there's a huge surge on culture towns, being the UK's town of culture. And one of the things that I've noticed in those applications is that there's a real emphasis on bringing young people on board and showing how we're integrating young people into the culture of where we live. I know that you've got some perspectives on the way that you've brought young people together into spaces. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, gladly. And it's interesting to see that everybody's talking about it. I'm not sure if everyone is talking about it or if I've just stopped becoming a young person and now I'm listening about it. But it is very important, I think. And there's so many ways to do it. And it's not hard. It's essentially about stepping back and letting other young people fill the gap, fill the space for you. So we ran a community event in central London back in October, and our guest speakers for the day were a group of young people. And here's an example of that. But the impact that had was, it meant that people of different generations that don't normally get to sit down and listen to a 24-year-old living in central London going about his life in the way that he's experiencing it, And it just created that wonderful opportunity for people to actively listen that otherwise wouldn't have come together at that event. And it literally flipped the narrative. Whereas normally in this space, you'd see essentially an older person, perhaps somebody who's been in their career for a really long time, talking about their experience. It was really lovely to really flip that narrative on the head and shake it up a little bit. And the conversations and even the feeling of the day that came out as a result was just this empathy, this natural empathy, and a real curiosity to listen and hear other people's perspectives and journeys. And people of different ages would start talking about, their grandchildren and saying, well, they're on social media. And what that meant was they were seeing them as experts of their own experience. And I think that is a really key part, is seeing people as experts of their experience. Because I think, looking back in the past, we see young people as needing to develop a skill set, but all of a sudden you've got people of a different generation wondering what it's like for youth to receive this thing they want to create. Well, young people, ask them.
And I was there, and it was an exciting, buzzing event. It genuinely felt like people were on a par with one another. There was no power dynamics in that space, and that it was a really good leveler, for listening. So
No, there's something about co-creation there as well, isn't there? Because I know that's another topic with Towner cultures and things, but it just goes back to creating those meaningful opportunities for people to share their experience and hold that space as well.
And just if I can come in there too, going back to what you said at the start, Sam, about the communities who maybe don't feel they have enough diversity or have any diversity in some respects, and you point out what diversity actually is. But when you also think about young people of any age, really, from cradle upwards, and living in a community that maybe doesn't have what we would consider traditional diversity, having opportunities like that, I think, helps them make connections and recognize, the power of difference too, and also reach out and get to know what else is going on in the world as well. I think those kinds of opportunities have great power.
And then lastly, we could talk about this for hours, couldn't we? But Grainne, you just mentioned reaching out. What would be our, some top tips that we would leave people in terms of how we reach people, to join our events and activities? So one of the ones that I learned recently from, a mini culture share, that's one of the techniques that people use, and they invite people to bring an object to share about their culture with one another. And the person that was leading on that said about going where people are, rather than expecting, I'm holding an event here, so everybody should come to me. It's about finding out who you exactly want to meet and finding out where they are. So that was one of the top tips. Have either of you got one or two others that we can share?
Yeah, I can build on that. We did an event in Plymouth and we went to a wellbeing festival and handed out leaflets. A lot of people don't like leaflets. We also gave people the opportunity to scan a QR code, but they came to the event with their personalized invite, so they felt that sense of belonging that brought them through the door, and that reduced that natural feeling that a lot of us feel of anxiety when you go along to something for the first time. So giving people a sense of belonging when you have that first contact to invite them to a follow-up activity is a really powerful tool.
I think focusing in on, that, reaching out to people who are different than you, and whether that's age or kind of ethnic diversity and things like that. I think a great way too is to invite them to come and share something that's like really powerful to them, really meaningful, whether that is cultural dance or whether that is they come as a group. So for instance, if you're a group that traditionally only interests older people and you want to get young people through your doors, or you want to get families through your doors, a good way would be to organize something that invites maybe like a group of dancers to come, and then that will mean that they and their parents or grandparents will come along too. And so as a result, you'll be bringing new people into your event, whether that's a big lunch or whether that's anything else that you're doing. Just thinking about, who you're trying to reach and what they're interested in, and then adding that element in will add diversity, but it will also provide interest to the group that you have.
That's really great. So I think our sort of roundup of that is about celebrating the difference, welcome the newness, and what are the consequences if we don't do this stuff. I think that's what we'll end with. But yeah, thank you very much if you're watching this. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we do, and hope to see you again really soon.